It was summer 1987. It was Australia Day, 26th of January. We were about to go back to school. In fact, I think we were going to get our books the next day, and we felt that that summer had been one of freedom and sun-kissed memories, and we felt kind of invincible. My best friend Robin and I went off to the 96 FM Sky Show, which was down on the foreshore of the city of South Perth. We had with us no mobile phone, because a mobile phone was something out of a science fiction story in those days. We had enough change in our pocket for perhaps a bus ride home, perhaps a Chico roll, perhaps a choc milk or chips, and that was about it. We got on the bus at Garden City and we met our friends on the bus, Sarah and Vanessa, and it was a packed bus with everyone going into the city, and it was noisy and it was bustling. And over the noise of the bus, Robin and I were bragging loudly that we've never been caught for anything we've done. Honestly, we haven't. We've never been caught. Loud and proud. When we got to the Perth foreshore, the South Perth foreshore, the place was packed. There were picnickers, there were children running around. It was a beautiful night. It was balmy. You know what it's like in summer when you're 16 years old, about to turn 17 and going into year 12. Everything is alive. Everything is magic. Your sun-kissed skin and just the way that you feel about life. Everything is exciting. So that night we met some boys down on the South Perth foreshore, down at the bottom of Men's Street. And I'd known these boys for a little bit of time. They were a little bit older than us, but we felt that we were really up to their level. They lived in a house of their own in Grant Street in Cottesloe. And I had a tendency towards obsession, and I was obsessed with a boy by the name of David. He was a surfy boy. Like, he was bodelicious. He had a girlfriend. Her name was Antoinette. But I really thought that, first of all, I was quite hot to trot that night. I felt that I was definitely a catch. And to be honest, I hated Antoinette. I thought she was a complete mole. We watched the fireworks from one of the playgrounds down on Men's Street, as it used to look. We were sitting up on one of the slides. Now, I had shells plaited into my hair. I had green harem pants, and I was a vegan 3 decades before my time, off and on. However, that night I'd pinched my brother's tan leather jacket from his room and I was wearing that over the top, and I felt incredible. After the skyworks had gone off and we'd had a great time, the boys decided that they were going to head back to Cottesloe and asked us if we wanted to go too. Well, what would be the harm? We head back to Cottesloe. We never got caught for anything we did anyway. Why not just have a bit of fun, go down the beach, you know, maybe get up to a bit of mischief, and then we'll head home later, and our parents will be fine with that. So that's what we decided to do. And because I was madly in love with this surfy boy, and he was kind and sensitive and kind of, you know, I thought he would, you know, be one that I could, show my poetic side, but also show my kind of sexy hippie allure. When we got back there, he was pretty okay with coming down to the beach with us. And the lure of the sand and the lure of the night sky and the lure of that, that sound of the waves that just coming lapping in on the shore, a little bit of a wind that was coming up, was too much for all of us. My friend, Robin, who was a little bit of an entrepreneur at school, her boyfriend's father used to supply her with mull, which she then sold to the rest of the school. And she also used to forge all the signatures to, pretend that, parents were okay with their kids being away. So she had quite a lucrative business going. She got stuck into a joint. I got stuck into a joint. David got stuck into a joint. And while Robin was imagining in her drug-fueled fantasy that the wind was actually her riding like a car the landmass of Australia off into the sky, up into the universe, I decided that it was my time to pounce on David. Now, in those days, I was under the impression that giving a guy a head job, which is what we called them in those days, or a heady, was enough to inspire romance, long-term romance, perhaps even down the road marriage and kids. What I didn't really understand, that it's possible that skill might have been involved. But I had skill. I was an expert because I'd given John Jones a head job up at Wallace Hill the year before. And so my drug-addled brain and my unbridled enthusiasm took over, and I went to town. At about 3 a.m, my friend and I decided that it might be time to think about heading home. But in those days, there were no nighttime buses. There was nothing. So we realised what the time was, and we kind of thought, okay, look, we can't do anything now. We're going to have to wait it out. So we'll spend the night with the boys. We slept on the couch, and we ended up going home very, very early the next morning. On the bus home, we did discuss how we were going to deal with this situation and what we were going to say to our parents. We decided that we were going to go home to my house first, and we would deal with it then. My mum was a little more liberal, and we thought, look, we'll tell her that we went to Sarah's, and we stayed the night, and she'll be fine with that because it was down the road, and we'll be fine. We never get caught, right? We opened the front door, and to this day, I will never forget the look on my mother's face when we walked in. She was standing in her dressing gown, her face haggard and ashen, in the sunken dining room. And we walked in and we stood there, and she said, "Where have you been?" And I said, I lied, I said, "Well, we were at Sarah's." And she said, "No, you weren't. I rang Sarah and you weren't there." Oh, the fuck. The game's up. I said, "Okay, all right." And I told the truth. And I said, "Okay, we were at Jason's in Cottesloe." And she said, "No, you weren't. I rang him as well. And he said you weren't there." And at this point, I didn't know what to do because I had told the truth. But she didn't believe me. She'd rung everyone in the address book, the little address books we had in those days, prior to mobile phones. She'd gone through mine, and she'd rung everybody. What I didn't realise was that Jason, who was actually a lovely boy, he panicked when my mum called him that morning and said, "Oh, no, Mrs. Geneve, no, Alex was not with us." And of course she believed him, and so when we came in, she didn't believe anything we said after that. There was nothing we could do that would convince her that we had actually been where we said we were. So, Robin rang her father, and he told her on the phone that her mother was in bed with the stress of what had happened. So she got on her bike and rode home to her fate and left me to mine. I rang Jason and I said, Jason, you've got to tell my mum that this is the truth now, that I actually was with you. And what he actually did was a beautiful thing. He turned up later that morning with a huge bunch of flowers for my mother. And when my mum saw him with those flowers, they both burst into tears. And I saw my mother wilt, and I thought, I have put her through so much. I had no idea that my arrogance and that my entitlement and that my feeling that I can do whatever I want, nobody's going to care. I'm entitled to go out, I'm entitled to be a young adult, I'm entitled to do all these things, would actually have that effect on her. I was banned from seeing Robin for a month, and that was bad enough, but the real punishment came when we found out that our parents had got together and they had decided that that night they might need to go and visit the morgues. There had actually been 2 girls murdered in Perth that night. And the next morning, before we'd come home, they were contemplating this most horrific of things. This was January 1987. 3 months prior, Catherine and David Burney began their killing spree, not far from us in Willagee, only a few kilometres. They lured and kidnapped and tortured and raped and murdered 4 young women in Perth. The 5th one, a survivor, got away. And when she went to the police, they didn't even believe her. So, summer should be full of sun-kissed dalliances, and it should be for carefree nights on the beach. And it was again for us, but never without a thought for those who loved us. Thank you.